Okay, so it might sound like I'm repeating myself from the Into the Spider-Verse video I did a couple of years back, but I'll just get this out of the way. This movie is incredible. It's rare for any sequel to meet expectations in my opinion, let alone surpass them. But that's exactly how I felt after watching Across the Spider-Verse. This movie is packed to the brim with Easter eggs and references. I mean, I thought the first one was crazy, but they nearly go overboard with it this time. Not in a bad way, of course. It doesn't distract from the main narrative, especially for viewers who aren't actively looking for that kind of stuff in the first place. This is the kind of film you can watch once and follow the story just fine, but it definitely rewards multiple viewings. Not just because of the caption boxes or details that might be easily missed, but because there's so much layered into every frame. There is one tiny gripe I'll get out the way now, and that's the audio. When I went to see it in the cinema, I genuinely struggled to hear some of the dialogue, especially during the fight scene between Gwen and the Vulture. At first I thought it was just me, or maybe the cinema speakers were trash, but interestingly, this turned out to be a widespread issue. As a matter of fact, Phil Lord, who was one of the writers and producers, actually made a statement about this, urging projectionists to set the volume to around 7 to 7.5 dB on their soundboards. Sony even sent out an update version to all cinemas in early June that year to fix the issue. But what's interesting is when I rewatched the film recently, that same part still felt off, like the audio still hadn't been fixed yet, so thank God for subtitles I guess. Oh, and speaking of Gwen vs the Vulture, I wasn't expecting the movie to start from her perspective, so that caught me off guard. At first I didn't know how to feel about it, but the longer it went on, the more I understood the direction that they were taking. She kicks things off with a narration that mirrors the usual Spider-Man intro. You know, the classic, I'm Spider-Man, here's how it happened. But it's done differently here. Gwen ties in both her and Miles' story, giving just enough background without spoiling what's about to unfold. It's vague but intentional. The real focus becomes how she ended up where she is now and how that connects to her universe, the Spider Society, which I'll get into later on, as well as the complicated relationship between her and her dad. Again, even though it wasn't the direction that I and most of the audience expected, it was paced surprisingly well. And that's mainly because they kept Miles tied to the intro just enough to keep the momentum going before shifting focus to Gwen's backstory, which not only connects back to Miles but also taps into some of the movie's core themes, isolation and feeling misunderstood. Then it wraps up with her fight against the Vulture, which isn't just a flashy set piece, which I'll also get into later on, but actually acts as a clever plot device. That scene introduces Miguel and Jessica Drew, linking her to the Spider Society and ultimately gives her the opportunity to cross paths with Miles again, while also setting things up for a bigger conflict with the Spot that he understandably didn't even realize he started. It all ties together so well, sort of like a...
Don't dare finish that sentence. Don't do it.
Anyway, I could go on and on about the scenes in this portion alone and the rest of the movie, but this could end up being a repetitive hour-long video. But if there is something major that I missed in this section or the next, just drop it in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Alright, let's get into the behind-the-scenes stuff now. So I've spent quite a bit of time sharing my thoughts on the movie, as well as diving deeper into how I interpreted certain scenes. But I think it's only right that I take a step back and focus on what went into making the whole thing happen, as well as highlighting certain key references. The behind the scenes work is just as impressive as the final product. It's hard not to see the passion behind this sequel, and that's mostly because of the subtle personal details spread throughout the movie, which gives me a perfect opportunity to point out something that most people, including myself, wouldn't have even realized in the first place. A lot of the background characters are actually modeled after the animators and filmmakers of this movie, which is something that other movies and even video games tend to do, but I always enjoy seeing it happen. It's nothing too crazy, but I thought it'd make sense to point it out anyway. Now, still on the subject of references, there was a movie that came out in 2022 that you might not have heard of, I doubt it, which also ended up winning an Oscar titled Everything Everywhere All at Once, which interestingly has some unexpected ties to this movie. Both Phil Lord and Christopher Miller are close friends with its creators, and since Into the Spider-Verse had a scene where Miles throws a bagel at one of the scientists, who later becomes the Spot with powers to travel between universes, it ends up tying together pretty well. Especially since Everything Everywhere All at Once also uses a bagel to represent the multiverse. It's clear I didn't explain that perfectly, but you get what I mean. Either way, I thought it was interesting. Anyway, those are honestly some of the most important ones that I felt were worth sharing. It's not much, but that's not what this video is mainly about, so let's dive into the animation section. So just like the first film, animation gives the team way more freedom than live action ever could. With full control over every detail in a picture plan, which is basically their master blueprint for every shot, angle and timing, they're able to push things way beyond what we're used to seeing. What they pulled off here was bold, maybe even uncomfortable from an animation standpoint, but that's exactly what made it stand out. It was something I genuinely appreciated while watching, and it clearly got the audience, including myself, hyped to see more of that style, so of course they had to take it to the next level. Speaking of which, while the first film focused more on a single world but showcased various art styles through the characters, this movie does both, reinventing not only the characters but their worlds as well. Part of their vision was to make these worlds feel like they came from different comic books and creators, which opened up way more directions for the film's narrative. Inspired by a range of comic books and fine artists, the team had to build an entirely new toolset beyond what they used in the first film to make it work. This allowed the team to show what a character might be thinking within a scene without relying on dialogue. A great example of show, don't tell, which I'm always a fan of. There's also a scene near the start of the movie that really highlights how they contrast these different worlds. Remember earlier when I mentioned Gwen's fight with the Vulture? Well, here's where I can dive deeper into it properly. The team actually described this scene as a great opportunity to explore old versus new in a single setting. A clean expression of modernist design inside the Guggenheim Museum clashing with the Da Vinci-style Renaissance drawings of the Vulture. It's a clever way to visually reinforce the film's themes. One of the biggest standouts in this movie was Spider-Man India, also known as Pavitra Prabhakar. He became a fan favorite immediately, and for good reason. His city was designed to capture the scale and energy of Mumbai and Manhattan, hence the name. To make the city feel like this endless chasm, they chose to move the camera vertically through the environment rather than horizontally, kind of stacking, and I quote, multiple New Yorks on top of each other. It gave everything a sense of overwhelming scale. They also made sure to weave in as much of India as possible, not just through the art style, but with multiple Indian dialects spread throughout various scenes. Even the onomatopoeia was translated to match each universe's language. Another personal favourite of mine for obvious reasons was Spider-Punk. The animators were actually nervous about how to bring his chaotic cut and paste style to life, since it's so different from the cleaner look of the rest of the Spider crew. They decided to embrace every Punk influence they could find, from the raw DIY look of his universe to the newsprint textures, torn posters and gritty scribbles. It all feels like a Punk zine come to life. His design and movement changed from frame to frame, making him feel completely unpredictable, which was the point. He's basically the living embodiment of rebellion. Okay, so to wrap this section up, there is one more moment that really stood out to me, which is the Lego Dimension scene, and there's a reason why. That whole sequence was actually animated by Preston Mutanga, who was just 14 years old at the time. But this is how he got discovered by Sony. Preston recreated a shot-for-shot Lego version of the Across the Spider-Verse trailer for fun and posted it online. The team at Sony were so impressed that they reached out and asked if he'd be interested in animating the Lego scenes for Across the Spider-Verse, and of course he said yes. He ended up animating the entire sequence from home after school, working with Sony remotely using Blender, which is a free open source 3D animation program, and his own Lego rigs with a bit of help from his dad to balance school and the project. Preston even got credited in the actual movie, which I'm glad to hear. And you know what? He might be one of the youngest people to animate a scene for a big budget film, and hands down one of my favourite behind the scenes stories. So shouts out to Preston. And shouts out to you if you're still watching this, I really appreciate it. Anyway, I'm completely done with this section now, so let's move on to the next. Before I dive into the comic creators behind these characters, I have to talk about the Spider Society, specifically the escape sequence, which is hands down one of the craziest moments in the entire movie, not just narratively, but in terms of animation and style. Even though it was a fun concept according to the team, it was incredibly difficult to pull off, taking around 2 years to get the sequence together. Phil Lord, the film's writer and producer, wanted to make sure there was something for every Spider-Man fan in there, so they went through tons of Spider-Verse comics to find as many variants as possible. They ended up pulling up around 50 directly from the comics, then reimagined those, but still needed even more. That's when Kris Anka, one of the film's lead character designers, stepped in and created an extra 100 original Spider characters, each with unique render styles and looks. And obviously, putting all those characters on the screen at once brought a massive challenge for the team. They had to balance the color palette and lighting without distracting from the main focus. They built the world with a more neutral palette, which made it easier for the Spider characters to stand out. And to keep things cohesive, they leaned on different shades of red, blue, white and black, which obviously worked very well. On top of that, they layered in loads of background details across every shot, while making sure the main focus of each moment was still clear. They also had to balance the comedy with the emotional weight of Miles' desperation and intensity, which took a lot of trial and error to get right, and they definitely executed. Okay, now we can get into how the comics inspired this movie beyond just its story. Kris Anka, who spent over a decade designing costumes for Marvel Comics, joined the team to help design all the Spider variants as I mentioned earlier. He made sure they respected not only the source material but also the ideology behind each character, which made him the perfect fit. Rick Leonardi, best known for co-creating Spider-Man 2099, also got involved to help translate his iconic look to animation. He joked that he was glad he doesn't use cross-hatching, which would have been a nightmare to animate, and instead uses feathering, a much cleaner shading style that worked better on screen. Then there's Dan Slott, the so-called godfather of the Spider-Verse. He pretty much wrote the 3 major Spider-Verse comic events between 2014 and 2023, so he was key in helping the filmmakers connect everything from the first movie to this one. In his words, his job is to torture Spider-Man, putting him through guilt, responsibility, and adventure all at once, which I honestly think these movies wouldn't have hit as hard without that foundation, so shout out to these comic creators for laying the groundwork that made it all possible. Damn, how do I end this? Okay, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse is still a great movie in my opinion, even after multiple watches. It is a bit difficult to call it perfect when it ends on a cliffhanger instead of a full conclusion, so we'll have to wait and see. I don't really mind delays if they mean a well thought out finished product. I mean, these last few movies have earned that patience from me and from a lot of fans. Not everyone, sure, but that's to be expected. Also, this could end up being one of the best trilogies we've seen. I know The Lord of the Rings and The Dark Knight are on that list for a lot of people, and a few others, but this could be one of those if they stick the landing. And I know I might be reaching for a lot of people, and some people might not agree with me with this, but yeah, tell me in the comment section. Tell me if you agree or disagree, but I do really think that this could be the case with this film. These are the only movies Sony have put out recently that I've genuinely enjoyed without any major issues, and based on their recent releases, I hope they let the team do what they do without interrupting. And honestly, that's all I've got to say. I didn't really talk about the cast much, but they all did fantastic. I wanted to focus more on the people behind the scenes whose work doesn't always get highlighted. I could be wrong, but that's what it seems like. There's also The Spider Within, a Spider-Verse story, which touches on Miles dealing with anxiety based on what he went through in the first movie, leading into this one. I don't think I'll do it justice trying to dive deep into it here, so check it out and let me know what you think in the comments. It's definitely worth watching, so I'll link it in the description. Also, let me know what you thought about the movie and whether or not you agree with anything I said. Thanks so much for watching the video if you made it this far into it, and please like and subscribe for more videos like this in the future. Anyway, that's all I've got for now, so I'll catch you in a bit.